I am a dyslexic English teacher. You're probably wondering, how is that possible? Well, let's talk about it. First, we have to understand, what is dyslexia? So dyslexia is bad, a bad thing. Some people say it's a learning disability. It's not. It's not a disability. It's an ability. It's an ability to do and see things that most people cannot do or see. Sure, there are some advantages and disadvantages, but there are also a lot of misconceptions about what dyslexia is and what it means for a person. If you ask people, what is dyslexia, you get a whole range of answers. Everything from here, I got these, it's about a lack of intelligence. It means you're stupid, that you cannot read, you cannot do math properly because you mix up the numbers and stuff. It's a learning disability. Something's wrong with your ability to learn. And that's not true at all. We'll go into that later. They say that people are lazy or unmotivated, that they should try harder. What they don't understand with that is that dyslexics actually try harder than most other people do. You can outgrow dyslexia, or it can be cured. That's not true. In fact, many people grow into dyslexia as they get older. Adult dyslexia is a real thing. As your brain changes over time, you can develop certain elements of it. I remember someone told me once, a long time ago, they said that dyslexics see the world backwards. It's like a mirror image. That was a strange one. That dyslexia is a medical diagnosis. It's not. It's neurological. And that it affects more boys than girls. That's also not true. It's equally amongst girls and boys. They flip numbers and letters. Well, that is true. I do flip my numbers quite a bit. So when I write my numbers, I might write 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Well, I'll invert the 3 and not even realize that I do it. Sometimes that just happens. The biggest one for letters is the B and the D, going from right to left. I do the same thing with the Q and the P. Some of the most amazing people in history were dyslexics. Charles Schwab, JFK, that actress from what's her name? Keira Knightley, Steven Spielberg, Orlando Bloom, who I once met, was a guest at my hotel once. Whoopi Goldberg, who was also a wonderful woman. I got the chance to meet her as well. Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, who, going back in history, of Albert Einstein, Henry Ford, Thomas Edison, Pablo Picasso, Leonardo da Vinci, obviously, Steve Jobs. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And this is just the people who admit that they have this. There are many, many more out there that I can see it. Dyslexia is not about intelligence. It's about neuroscience. If you look on YouTube, there's all kinds of wonderful videos that try to explain the benefits and the disadvantages. One of them, though, was a TED Talk I saw a couple of years ago, and I'm going to paraphrase this because I think it was kind of interesting. The guy giving the talk really explained the neuroscience behind dyslexia pretty well, so I'm going to paraphrase it a little bit here. The outer part of our brain is called the cortex, right? Part of that cortex is something called mini columns, and they act as like telephone poles, if you will, on the brain. And connecting these poles are something called axons. So just imagine like telephone poles strung across a field and axons connecting the poles with each other. That's where the electric pulses are strung to and from the different mini columns. People with autism have very, very short axons. So as a result, they're able to do very focused and highly concentrated tasks, special abilities to recognize patterns. On the other side of the spectrum is where you get dyslexics like me, where the axons are very long, stringing these mini columns together. So these poles in the brain are spread far apart. As a result of this, it allows us to take two seemingly completely different concepts or ideas and then creating a canvas, a narrative, if you will, to explain that. Think 7 Degrees of Kevin Bacon. So this gives us significant cognitive advantages. We're able to put together two different data points and find commonalities or connections between them that most people cannot see. In our society, there are many different careers, and if you look at 4 specific career paths that dyslexics tend to be very successful at, those are engineering, entrepreneurship, architecture, and the arts. Teaching does not typically fall into one of those categories. In addition, dyslexics like me have a problem with something called phonetic decoding. And what that is basically looking at a bunch of scribbly lines on a paper, assigning a sound to those scribbly lines, and then stringing those sounds together to form a sentence or a narrative. That's where our spelling issues and our syntax issues and our grammar issues come from. It takes a dyslexic 5 times more energy to process that information and to produce a result than a normal person. So let me give you an example. I'll go here and show you. Okay, so let's do this. Yes, my classroom has the old-fashioned chalk. Take a word like, say, ocean. Okay? O-C-E-A-N. Now, when I was a little boy, this made no sense to me. I would look at this and say, Ocean, right? Because for me, phonetically, this is spelled ocean, right? But of course, that's incorrect. So my spelling has always been terrible. So one of the things I've had to learn to do in order to spell words like this was to turn this into an acronym. So I basically make a little sentence out of it. In this case, it's on cake every ant naps. So, and now even to this day, 30 years after learning this trick, I still say this in my head when I'm spelling a word. On cake every ant naps. So here's another example, this word. Okay, beautiful. I always struggled with these 3 vowels, the order of the vowels, because to me, phonetically, this makes no sense. And English is full of things like this, right? So again, I had to create an acronym or a sentence based on the order of the letters. So in this case, it's boys eat apples under trees plus a suffix. So, and I do the same thing with the other words in this word family. Beauty, boys eat apples under trees plus the suffix. Beautifully, boys eat apples under trees plus the double suffix. So with that, you can very easily see how much more energy it takes for a dyslexic to spell or to write or to even give a speech. Why did I become an English teacher? You're probably wondering. The truth is, I'm a very good English teacher. Part of that is because I have worked so hard in my life to master this language to the best of my ability. Now, do I make mistakes? All the time. I make grammatical mistakes, spelling mistakes. I still struggle with some words, but I still have a better understanding of the language than most people. This also goes back to me learning new languages, such as even Chinese. Now, orally, Chinese I can get, because it's just a bunch of sound groupings, monosyllabic groupings put together. But then when you add the writing and the reading, then it just gets all messed up in my head, especially some of the more complicated and more complex Chinese characters are very difficult for my dyslexic brain to decode and assign that sound to and then produce a sentence. It takes 5 times more energy for me. So if you don't mind, allow me to get a little personal with you. When I was a little boy, first, second grade or so, I was falling behind in school, and they told me that I had this kind of strange thing called dyslexia. And I was too young to understand what exactly it meant. And in high school, I was completely lost because my self-esteem had taken quite a hit. You know, I thought I was a stupid kid and that I would never amount to anything. That's because I couldn't keep up with my peers, and I was embarrassed by that. So I was falling really behind. I just stopped going to class. Sophomore year, I think. So I remember they took me into the counselor's office, the guidance counselor, and my guidance counselor, he didn't care. He just told me, look, you're better off just quitting school and sailing around the world for the rest of your life. I won't lie, that did have some appeal. It wasn't just, you know, giving up on myself, but, you know, my own guidance counselor at the high school gave up on me. My parents, to all their credit, they threw tons of resources at me, private tutoring to catch me up, and even then it was still quite a struggle. And it wasn't just my parents. I mean, my entire family really helped out in this endeavor. Everyone sacrificed. My brothers, my sisters, my extended family, especially my older brother, who was very supportive during this time in high school. My parents then decided to send me to a special school in another city. It wasn't a boarding school, but it was a school designed for people with dyslexia and other related issues. And I thrived there. It was a very expensive school, and my parents, even with a partial scholarship that the school gave me, and working part-time after school as a janitor, you know, taking out the trash, cleaning the classrooms, it was still a great expense to my parents. There was small classrooms, personal attention. I got through about 2.5 years worth of high school math in one semester. Ended up getting really good grades and decent scores on the SAT as a result of this school. It wasn't like desks, nailed into a row, It was open and free, and we can arrange our desks any way we wanted to. And it was a lot more tolerance towards self-expression and a lot more patience if we were struggling with certain things. All the teachers there, a lot of them were dyslexics themselves, and they were wonderful teachers, and they helped me the same way that they had learned to learn. And it was a beautiful environment. I was able to go to college. But even when I went to university, I went to a big, giant university, and I struggled there because, again, I fell into this trap of being just another number in the classroom. The one-size-fits-all way of learning didn't apply to me. I found myself kind of falling behind again. It wasn't until I joined the military. I joined the Air Force. I was about 19, 20 years old, I guess. And the Air Force taught me discipline. All of my sergeants being goal-oriented, mission-oriented. I mean, if you're cut and you're bleeding, well, if you're not dying, you continue on with the missions. Those lessons really made a huge difference for me when I was taking university classes. And I ended up getting 3 degrees, including a master's degree. So after all of this, and now me becoming a teacher, I just really want to go back to my guidance counselor at the high school and give him a big... When it comes to self-esteem of dyslexics, it can take a real toll on you if you grow up in this way and nobody's giving you the, the support that you need, or they ostracize you, they put you in a corner like they did me. It took a toll on me, and it takes a toll on many dyslexics. Here are some statistics that I found. It's kind of heartbreaking. It's estimated that 10 to 20% of the world's population has some form of dyslexia. Most dyslexics are on the very mild side of that scale. But here's the thing, only 3% of the world is identified as dyslexic in their entire lifetime. There are hundreds of millions of people in this world walking around, and they have no idea that their brain operates in this fashion. I mean, you can very easily write yourself off as just being stupid, as opposed to just learning differently. Over time, you start to create your own kind of truth in your head. You're not as smart as the smart kids. You can't run with the football players, most of us at least, right? If people are lucky, they get into the artsy-fartsy kind of world where they're, theater majors or musicians. I was lucky enough to be a musician. I played the viola. That was my escape. Music was my escape. Even there, as much as I enjoyed playing music, reading music was kind of difficult for me, as you can imagine. And because of this, 30% of all high school dropouts are dyslexic. 50%, half of all youths that are involved in some kind of drug abuse, alcohol abuse of some kind, are dyslexic. 70% of all juvenile delinquents in the United States are dyslexics. But on the flip side of this, those who are lucky enough to have the support and the development that they need go on to be very successful. 35% of all entrepreneurs are dyslexic. 40% of all self-made millionaires, half of all the rocket scientists at NASA are dyslexic. Why is there such a huge disparity between these two outcomes of juvenile delinquency and substance abuse to massive amounts of success? And I believe it goes back to an understanding of how your brain works, as well as the self-esteem aspect. Those with the correct support systems in their life don't go on to be begging for a rock out on Skid Row. They become functioning and in many ways excelling members of society, and they're not sitting behind bars. One of the biggest problems is that the current education systems throughout the world don't really take into consideration dyslexia or dyslexic children. It's more of a one-size-fits-all for all the students. And you see that not just in the classroom and the teaching methodology, but also from textbook-based training. And of course you have standardized testing, which is also another element that dyslexics really struggle with. Here in China, dyslexia is not a thing. I mean, it's not really talked about, as far as I know. The part of academia that I work in here in China doesn't really take into account any kind of dyslexia. I mean, this is a small classroom I'm in. My classes are gigantic. There really is no one-on-one type of learning at my college. There are some instances where I get to work with my students on a one-on-one basis, which is wonderful, and I can really focus get in on certain aspects. These are usually the very, very serious students in the English majors. I have thousands of students from all walks of life, rich, poor. Some of them have a very limited education background. Some of them have a lot of education. And it doesn't matter where you come from. Some are good at language acquisition and some are not. And that's why they come to me for help. In the past, I have taught middle schoolers and high schoolers who are studying for tests. These are brilliant, brilliant students, but they are studying to take a test and not necessarily learning to communicate, especially orally. So in those classes, you know, if I say like I have 10 students and they're all different ages, they range from 14 all the way to 50, I could identify the students immediately. I see it in the mirror when I look at myself. I can see it in them. Those that are displaying some elements of dyslexia. It's prevalent even here in China. One of the great things about being a dyslexic teacher is because I can see that and identify it almost immediately, I can group the other students all together and have them go off and do some kind of exercise, monitoring them from a distance and taking care of them as I can. But then I can focus on the one or two students and not just give them the attention, but also the tools and the tricks to help them move along and to give them the confidence they need. They're going to have to work harder, but if they have the confidence that they can do it, they will put in the work. There are different teaching methods that are used for these types of students. And you know what? It's funny because in my experience, the adult learners that I teach, the ones that struggle the most in language are also the most successful ones here in town. They're factory owners, they're engineers at these large firms, they're finance people, they are teachers themselves. It's a very, very important thing for the Chinese culture is academic achievement. So if you need extra help or if you need some different way of being taught or learning, there's kind of a stigma attached to it, much like it is in the West. And parents and the students themselves don't want to acknowledge it or even deal with it. So these students are kind of swept under the rug. They're kind of left behind. And that, again, really contributes to delinquency, a lack of confidence. Oftentimes when these students at a younger age struggle in school, they get into the real world, they become successful, they have to go back to a training center to learn English, and they're still struggling with it there. I mean, it's changing in many of the big cities. Individuality is starting to come into play here, and people are starting to embrace differences. But there's still a heavy emphasis on conformity in the education system. There's a real fear of being different. So knowing all of this, am I an effective English teacher as a dyslexic? And I think the answer is absolutely yes. In fact, I think I'm a very good English teacher because of it. I'm just different. I have all the regular skills any other English teacher would have. I have good knowledge of the language, experience, education, and methodology, and all the credentials you can think of. But what makes me unique is that I am dyslexic and I understand students who struggle a little bit more with things like language acquisition because I'm one of them. I think if a student can relate to their instructor, that's got to be a good thing. If you or anyone you do know has dyslexia, you're not better or worse than anybody else. You're just different. And that's a good thing. You know, don't let anyone tell you that it's a learning disability, because it's not. It's an ability to do things and see things that other people cannot. Maybe you don't have the fortunate safety net that was available to me when I was younger. But I guarantee you this, if you own it, make it part of your identity. You should leverage these gifts that have been given to you. Operating in the one-size-fits-all education environment that the world is in is difficult for us. So it's going to be more work, but you got to lean into those struggles. In the military, they have a term called embrace the suck, meaning, yeah, it sucks, but it feels good. You have a mission, and you need to accomplish your mission. So that's it for this video, guys. I think it's an interesting topic. It's something very personal. I don't run away from it. It's something that I embrace in my life. And if you are dyslexic, it's something you should embrace in your life too.